We lost Reverend Jackson, Jesse Jackson, civil rights advocate. He took over after the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King. He was one of the three men you see on the balcony there in Memphis when he got shot. And he's an interesting civil rights advocate. He's a preacher, like Reverend Martin Luther King. You know, the civil rights movement was started by preachers, not politicians. Don't ever forget that. It was Christian men who believed in God that led that. It was not a political movement. It was a spiritual movement, which is why they were bombing our churches. This is Black History Month. Not too many people talk about it, even my friends. They'll mention every other holiday, but they know me as an African American, and not one has ever mentioned congratulations for freedom or the civil rights or the Abraham Lincoln emancipation. They're talking about St. Patty's Day, the 4th of July, but when it comes to anything concerning African Americans, you'll find that most of your non-African American friends never acknowledge it to you. I don't believe not one has. Black History Month. Are you grateful that you have black friends in your life, people that love you and don't look at you racially? Because all of our parents were looked at that way. I doubt that your mothers and fathers were ever put in the back of a bus, but mine were. I doubt that any of you, your mothers or fathers, had to drink from a white water fountain in that regard. And yet, indirectly they did, because for whites only meant to keep the blacks out so that blacks did not invade the water fountain. Well, whites could drink from that, but they didn't want to because they saw black people as dirty. And when the famous soul groups that all of my white friends love, that soul music, Motown, you know, all of those artists, the most famous ones, Diana Ross included, you know, all of the big famous black singers, they had to go through the back of the very place where they were singing to white audiences. They were not allowed to come through the front door. They weren't allowed to eat. Even though they were the star of the show, they were not allowed to eat in the same room. Even the famous black ones, they had to obey the Jim Crow laws. When I was born, it was still going on. I remember when I went home to North Carolina because my mother and father divorced. I remember being kicked out of a white church. Now, white people would come once in a while to visit a black church, and they never got kicked out. But if a black person went to visit a white church, they got kicked out. I was one of them. And it's quite interesting when something that you guys see as movies was the reality. You walk down the street with your father, and a white man passes you by and calls your father, "Hey, boy, come over here," to your grown man father. Your little boy, you look up to your dad. Your dad is strong. He fixes cars. He can throw a ball. He can pick up heavy things. And all of a sudden, you're in the public, walking down the street, and some man calls your father the N-word regularly, or called him a boy. It's kind of interesting. So I'm so grateful because I did not have to suffer the level that my mother did, not to mention my grandmother. Can you imagine that? Well, if you're black, you can. Can you imagine not being able to vote because of the color of your skin? Or not being able to go into a certain class, or not be able to sit in the front of a movie theater? That was all the case for a lot of African Americans. And it's painful, Black History Month, because you have so many things that you had to fight for just to be treated right, that you didn't have time to be thinking. You didn't have, there were some, there are always pockets, there are always exceptions to the rule, and there were. But by and large, the majority of Black folks did not get treated very well. Now, if you were light-skinned and not so dark, you got treated better. White folks were always much nicer if you looked a little lighter skin, or if your hair was really fine and straight. So if you were a mixed race, you got favors that you didn't get if you looked too African. If your hair was too bushy and your skin was too dark. It was very common. And because of the fight to get ahead, even amongst your own, some Black people would treat other Black people who were darker even worse, because it brought them down. It was very difficult. But I grew up, and my father and mother they weren't activists. They were too busy working and living and trying to shield us from it, from the racial issues. So it was play with your own family, play with your cousins, play with your brothers. They tried to keep us close and keep us tight because they knew. And so we stayed in the home a lot. We didn't venture out too much, or with our families interacting, because they were afraid of the psychological effect. And my older sister suffered more. My older brother suffered more. By the time I was born, it was much easier for me. And I had a little bit of it, but not like my older siblings, and definitely not like my mother and father. So I grew up, and we lived in my father moved us into a mixed community. So I had white friends, and I never really had known the level as a child. I remember I didn't understand the level of racism or prejudice because we were in the right part of town. Depends on where you lived and if you could afford to live in a certain part of town. But when my mother and father divorced, my mother went back to North Carolina. So when I would go to visit her, I saw things were not that different. It depends on where you lived. Painful. So Reverend Jesse Jackson died, and it made me think about the struggle for being able to get a job. I remember, I didn't live in California where there was affirmative action. That was only in the latter years. There was no affirmative action for the most of us. And I was, by and large, typically always the most eager and qualified candidate, but I would not get the job. I could speak better than most, calculate better than most, discern and pass the tests, and even type, but they wouldn't give me the job. I lost many jobs growing up. So I took the jobs I didn't lose. And the ones I did get was usually hired by another black person who was in a position of power. My first job was Tom McCann's shoe store. It was a black woman who was managing the store, so she hired me. And before that, I did a paper route, which was the easiest job to get. Boy on the bicycle, on the paper route. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I had those opportunities. I'm grateful that I had white friends and wonderful white teachers and Jewish teachers and Jewish friends. I did not see color ever, but color saw me. I had no prejudice. I loved white people and only come to find out that as I grew more in knowledge of history, because most of it was kept from me, I finally realized that a lot of them didn't love me. But I was too naive to understand that. And it was as I got older and my brain was able to discern more, I was able to see the racism that I never saw because I thought very innocently. So I did not see it. Then I started to experience it. And it was very different. And I'll never forget the first time somebody actually used the N-word. I mean, we didn't grow up saying that word. Not like most young black people, they say that to each other, but not my generation. It was very strange to hear that word being spoken by a white person towards you, or somebody throwing a Coke bottle at your head or spitting at you. I've been spit on and Coke bottles thrown at and chased out of white churches and called the N-word and all of that. But it never made me hate white people. Isn't that interesting? I never hated them. I never hated them. It was bad, but I looked at it like that's just a person in sin, like any person, black or white, in sin. I didn't hate white people. I liked white people. I never hated them. I liked them. I found so much to admire about them. And I saw their good. I didn't see the bad until I saw the bad. And then I realized, oh, they got this part too. But not they, some, right? Some. I'm so grateful for my white friends. I love them as if they were the same race as I was. I see them as white, but I also see them just as much as my brother. And I love them. And most of the ones that are close to me, I love even more than I love someone who's black, because I don't love someone because they're black. I don't love people based on their color. I love people based on who they are, regardless of their color and regardless of their religion. I'm looking for people that are sincere and loving and loyal. But it wasn't that way for Reverend Jesse Jackson. It wasn't that way for Martin Luther King. And we had a cross burned on our yard, a Ku Klux Klan cross. I know what that's like. But I realized that all white people weren't that way. But it was harder for my mother, obviously. It was harder for my father. It was harder for my grandmother. It was harder for my grandfather and my great-grandmother, who was a slave. It was hard. So, Black History Month. I'm grateful to God for how far He's brought me. I'm grateful for the wonderful friends I have in my life, who I love. And my closest friends happen to be white. Go figure that one out. Yes, I'm grateful. And Jewish. I'm grateful to Papa that I am not a victim of hate or racism or prejudice, but I'm a victim of love. Because love got a hold of me and messed me up, turned me inside out and upside down, plant my foot on a solid ground. Now, many do not invite me to dinner, but I invite everyone to dinner. I don't have a fancy place, but everyone has eaten with me. I've cooked for every race and invited every type of person that you can believe. Homeless, not homeless, white, black, atheists, non-religious, Catholics, you name them. All types have eaten with me. All types have had an invitation at my home. All types have been treated with love and kindness. And literally more than 20 different nations I could name of friends from different countries, different walks of life. For Father has taught me how to love, not how to judge. And so I judge with love, since I love, rather than love to judge. And it is the wisdom of love that makes you right and make the right decisions. It's the wisdom of love that teaches you how to not be bitter, unforgiving, overly suspicious, hateful, spiteful. Only love can teach you that. And only love can teach you how to judge. So I'm grateful for the legacy of men who've made it easier for me, like Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Martin Luther King, Reverend Abernathy. So many who've gone before me. My life is easier because of their work and their sacrifice. No, they're not perfect, but no one is. Are you? Neither was King David. Neither was the prophets in the scripture. Are you? You see, God uses imperfect people to do his perfect work. I'm grateful. Praise Papa.